Awesome. So let's get into the topic. So the topic today I want to talk about is pain and blame. And I thought this was relevant because, like a lot of us are obviously feeling pain and kind of angry and obviously uncomfortable in the current situation. And, and a lot of that leads to finger pointing, who's obviously a lot of people pointing finger at the president, and also how it kind of percolates into our day to day. So I want to talk through some basics, nothing to do with politics, but just basics of pain and blame at a high level. So what is pain, right? So there is physical pain, obviously, the physical sensation, when you get hurt or whatever. And I'm not going to talk about the physical pain. Then there is what I call emotional pain, right? By emotional pain, I mean all the unpleasant emotions that we don't like to feel because they're unpleasant. I mean, sadness, anger, envy, rejection, loneliness, etc., etc. So, anything you and I don't want to or like to feel, all those I'm calling emotional pain. Uh, just give me 1 second. Sorry, my phone just fell off. Okay. So now what happens when these unpleasant emotions arise, right? Obviously, our survival brain, that we don't want to feel it. So because it's uncomfortable. So what we do is we short circuit it. How do we short circuit the emotional pain? Three common ways, right? One, we distract ourselves, obviously like television, internet, all the awesome digital ways of distracting. Or we do something to soothe ourselves. Could be around eating, smoking, drinking, any of the other things that we do. And lastly, we come up with a story to make sense, to explain the feeling and explain the feeling away in some ways, right? So the three tactics: distraction, soothing, and story making. And I'm going to focus on story making aspect. Now, why? So before we go into blame and story making, let's understand story making in general as to why do we make stories. The short answer is control, comfort, right? That's kind of a really short answer. The longer answer is our brain's only job, like literally only job of our brain, is to make sense of the world, right? The rules and the laws of nature and how people work and how societies work and how systems work. How do we make sense of it? And when the reason it is important for the brain to make sense of it is so that it understands and then it can predict what will happen. So if I understand this plus this equal to this, then I know when this plus this happens, I can predict what's going to, the output of the equation will be. And prediction helps us with feeling control and certainty, right? If we understand how systems work, then we can know the output or what's going to in some ways happen. That gives us certainty, that gives us control. And that's it. Like that's part of the control of survival strategy, right? Why our brains are trying to constantly make sense of the world. Now the truth is we hardly know the facts. So our brains make assumptions and stitches a coherent story. Now, like the word coherence is very important here. The stories don't have to be accurate. They just have to be coherent, meaning they have to align with our belief systems and they have to make sense to us. That's it. I mean, a very simple example, I don't know if you guys know this, our eyes, how our eyes work, right? So, I mean, the actual resolution of our eye camera, if you may, is pretty low. But our brains actually fill in the pixel to give us the high resolution that we see through our eyes. So this is how like just brains function. Like our brain just constantly filling in the gaps to make sense and to construct the bigger picture. So now if you take it to the next level, what happens when we blame someone, right? So what's the relationship between storytelling and blaming? When we blame someone, it is basically a story we make. example, I'll give you a simple example. So I had this, like an issue going with my friends, and we were not able to meet. And so I would message her, she's busy. She would message me, I'm busy. So last I messaged her for something, and she did not respond, right? I think for a couple of days. So immediately I had a story, because there was already tension brewing. Now she did not respond. And the only story that made sense in this circumstance to me was she must be angry. She doesn't care about our friendship. And that's it. And so that was easy and fast story my brain came up with, because I had this, like, I guess some rule in my brain that she has to respond within 24 hours to be a good friend. And so now, if our friendship was to go south, it is her fault. Let's be clear, right? So she was to be blamed. And this is the story I came up with, which was the story of my blame. And I don't know if you guys know Brené Brown. She's a very popular researcher. She was become very popular with her talk on TED Talk for vulnerability. And so she has this really good, like a summary of blame, which is blame is simply discharging of discomfort and pain. That's it. Blame is the process of discharging discomfort and pain. And I'll share a video that she has for 3 minutes on this on the page that you can read. It's really funny and actually insightful. Now, the opposite of blame is accountability, right? And accountability is the process that makes us vulnerable, because we have to then, like, actually have a conversation with the other person, have empathy, say we were hurt, all of that stuff. But that's the harder part. The blame is the easy part. And sometimes we would rather be it even our fault than nobody's fault, because it gives us control. Like, if we can't find somebody to blame, ourselves or the others, it's very uncertain and it's kind of out of control, and we can't deal with it. So now the sad part is when we blame so quickly, we miss the opportunity of empathy, right? To really think through what the other person might have gone through. Because it's a shortcut, right? It's a shortcut for pain and grief. If we don't want to feel the anger, the sadness, and really become vulnerable, to call the person, express that we are hurt, really hear them out, have empathy, kindness, this is a longer, harder process. And then blaming is the shorter, easier process. So to recap, right, four things about blame, right? Number one, blame is a shortcut to discharge pain and make sense and feel in control. Two, blame saves us from any responsibility on our part. Well, if it's their fault, we don't have to do anything. They need to go fix it. Three, it also saves us from feeling vulnerable. Four, blame saves us from the hard work of empathy. Empathy is hard, right? So blame saves us from all of these things, like responsibility, empathy, vulnerability. So why would we not go for the shortcut? And that's what we do. So now that we know what blame is and why we keep recoursing to it, what can we actually do about it? So there are three things I want to share. One, learning how to sit with the discomfort and the painful emotions, right? It's a muscle. It's a skill we can all build, right? Like the first time, for example, if you went skiing and the fear that you had, you probably decided, I don't want to ski. But like the more you tried at it, you were okay with the fear and you kept, giving in, and eventually you got good at it. So similarly, the more we learn how to sit with the uncomfortable emotions, the better we get at it. It's just a skill. And the part is to not forget is that these uncomfortable, painful emotions, they live in our body, right? I mean, emotions live in our body, not in our minds. So there is actual physical discomfort. Right? So when I'm feeling the rage and anger and I want to blame my friend, or when I'm really feeling sad and I want to blame my boss or the president or what have you, it actually is flowing through my nerves, right? That discomfort. And I need to sit with it. And how could I do that? The simplest technique is, just breathing, right? Breathing and meditation, this is where it comes in handy, right? So, like, if we do counted breathing and tap into our breath to just calm ourselves down. So, that's one technique of sitting with the actual physical discomfort of these painful emotions. Um, the second thing I do is uh, uh, kind of just like a step further than breathing is naming the emotions. So like when I'm feeling so overwhelmed that I can't even calm down and breathe, all I do is name. I'm feeling sad. I'm feeling angry. I'm feeling rejected. I'm feeling like a uprooted tree. I'm feeling like a, shipwreck. I'm feeling like, that's it. I just keep naming them. And the more I name them, by the end of it, I kind of feel calmer. So that's one technique, or I guess two techniques of how to actually physically sit with these painful emotions before concocting the, blame stories. The number two is when I'm actually calmer, right? So once I've done the breathing, the naming, then I do a technique called counter stories, where I assume the person's intent was good. Can I creatively come up with answers of why they did what they did? Right. So in my example, for example, my friend didn't respond. So I forced myself to come up with at least two or three reasons of why she didn't respond. Well, number one could be maybe she's just busy and she forgot. Other could be maybe, she also got hurt in the process and she's herself dealing with it. And then maybe she'll get back to me when she has finished processing. Or it could be, I've done this, like I write the message and I forgot to press the send button, right? As simple as that. So maybe she drafted and forgot to send. So I just came up with these counter stories. I didn't have a way to justify them or verify them, but it helped me at least get out of that hole that I was in, that the only reason she did not respond was because she doesn't care about me and our friendship. So well, now that I could see there are other possible reasonings, what could it be? I mean, long and behold, she did respond after 3 days, but, meanwhile, I had to be patient to process, have counter stories. And then once I have done both of these, an advanced step is, you know, investigating what am I unwilling to feel or what am I unwilling to accept. In this case, I was unwilling to accept that maybe our friendship isn't important to her. I was unwilling to accept that maybe I was wrong. I was unwilling to accept or feel vulnerable, right? So once we have calmed ourselves through breathing, naming the emotions, once we have had the empathy and counter stories, we could go and investigate further of what we are unwilling to feel. And so that's kind of all the content I had on, to recap the emotional pain, right, that we go through unpleasant feelings which come up every day. How we start making stories, and blaming is a shortcut and story making process that our brains do to help us, from feeling vulnerable, to help us saving ourselves from the hard work of responsibility, to help us from, doing the hard work of empathy. And to counter the blame culture that we all have, we could sit with our emotions by breathing, naming them. We could also come up with counter stories and empathy exercise. And then once you've done that, we could also ask ourselves a question, what am I unwilling to feel? So that's the content I had that I want to share today. So I'm going to unmute all of you and would love to have a discussion on this topic, because I'm sure you've felt